Israel has valid, long-standing historical ties to the land?
No. Legally, no. Legally, no. I mean, that's the claim. It doesn't have any legal foundation. In the League of Nations a covenant that was part of the Versailles Treaty, the Palestine Mandate was supposed to be provisionally recognized as an independent state, a state for everyone, a single state for all the people on that land, not a state for a particular racial group. So the idea, and Israel is a Jewish state by definition, and there is no legal basis for a specifically Jewish state on that land in international law.
What is or would be Israel's strongest argument before a court of law?
For what? To dominate Palestinians? There is no argument for committing genocide. I mean, what needs to be justified?
These come up often when I interview people who speak in defense of Israel.
Okay, self-defense.
Thank you.
Okay.
You took the words out of my mouth. This is the first thing that comes up.
Yes. So let's go back to 1967. So why is Israel there? There was a war between Israel and three of its neighbors. Israel started that war, and it was a war started preemptively, illegally, because states cannot use force lawfully in non-immediately imminent anticipatory self-defense. As a result of that illegal war, Israel captures the territory. It has no right, a state has no right to retain control over territory simply for security purposes. And the right of self-defense, therefore, is inapplicable to that kind of action. States have to deal with security threats non-forcibly when it comes to the extraterritorial use of force, unless they are at risk of an actual or an imminent attack. And Israel was not in 1967. It used force anyway. And of course, the clue is in the name. It was over in 6 days. There was no longer any threat. Insofar as there was a threat, it was removed through that action.
Well, they of course would disagree that there was no longer any threat. But what about in the context?
I don't think Israel would disagree that after the 6 Day War, there was no then immediate threat of attack from the three Arab states. So Israel should have withdrawn at that moment. On the 7th day, there should have been a retreat, because there was no legal basis to maintain the control over the West Bank and the Gaza Strip.
What about in the context of Gaza today? And I'm taking you beyond, obviously, the remit of the ICJ's advisory opinion. But Israel today says more than ever that it is acting in Gaza in self-defense following the attacks by Hamas in Israel on October the 7th.
So Israel has been using force in Gaza since 1967, continuously. And on October the 6th, 2 years ago, Israel was already exercising military authority over Gaza, and, as I say, illegally. In that situation, when a state is using force illegally, if there is violent resistance to that illegal use of force, the state's use of force does not somehow then become lawful as a means of defense to that defense. There is no defense against defense.
If Israel, hypothetically, decided we want to be in full compliance with international law, what would it have to do?
In general, there needs to be an end to racial discrimination and the domination by one racial group over another from the river to the sea. It needs to be the return of all of the Palestinian people who were forcibly displaced and have been displaced from that land for a century. That's also a legal requirement.
Displaced since when? You're talking 1948 or 1967?
No, since even before 1948, but certainly from the Nakba and 1947, 1948 and onwards. A legal right of return in international law that is vested in all of those people and their descendants. The remaining non-Jewish Palestinian people who were not forcibly displaced in 1948, but who are treated in various ways as second-class citizens within Israel, around 17% of the citizenry of Israel, that's unlawful. And that illegal discriminatory treatment that constitutes apartheid needs to end. There needs to be equality. And then when it comes to the extension of Israeli rule into the remaining 22% of mandatory Palestine, the West Bank and including East Jerusalem and the Gaza Strip, there needs to be a complete withdrawal immediately, the removal of all settlements and settlers, and the provision of compensation to the Palestinian people for all of the harm that they have suffered since 1948.
This part gets lost in discussions about the advisory opinion. It does mention compensation.
Insofar as it addresses the 67 onwards, yes, the requirement of compensation as well as withdrawal.
So land that has been taken, again, according to international law, as it is laid out in this advisory opinion, land that has been taken from Palestinians by Israel since 1967 needs to be returned to them.
Yes.
And where that is not materially possible, they need to be...
No, there is no excuse for not returning the control of the land. So Israel doesn't have the option to maybe withdraw from some of the land and retain some of the land and then just provide compensation. That's not legally permissible. What I mean by compensation is compensation for all of the other loss suffered by the Palestinian people as a result of the unlawful occupation.